共建“一带一路”注重的是
Belt and Road cooperation is based on the belief that flame runs high when everyone adds wood to the fire, and that mutual support can get us far. Such cooperation seeks to deliver a good life not only to people of just one country, but to people in other countries as well. It promotes connectivity, mutual benefit, common development, cooperation, and win-win outcomes. Ideological confrontation, geopolitical rivalry, and bloc politics are not a choice for us. What we stand against are unilateral sanctions, economic coercion, and decoupling and supply chain disruption.
The curtains have come down on the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in Beijing. The occasion also served to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. Over 150 countries and 30-plus international organizations have signed more than 200 BRI cooperation agreements with China. In Africa, the multi-billion-dollar initiative has been instrumental in transforming the transport infrastructure landscape. On this special edition of the program, we look at the key outcomes of the just concluded Third BRI Forum. We will also cross over to my colleague Momodu Choi at QTV in the Gambia to give us more on the impact of the BRI in Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, joining me now to take a closer look at some of the key outcomes of the forum and how it may impact Africa, from Beijing, Professor John Gong, University of International Business and Economics in Israel, and a China Forum expert, and Professor David Monyae, International Relations and Foreign Policy expert and director at the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the program. Let me start off with a question to you both on the just concluded Belt and Road Forum. The Belt and Road Initiative is marking 10 years since its launch. President Xi Jinping announced 8 major steps to support the pursuit of Belt and Road cooperation. Professor John Gong, first off, let me get your thoughts on the key outcomes of the BRI Forum.
Well, I think President Xi delivered a dynamite speech, and I think it's a speech full of substance. The 8 areas that China is committed to, as you alluded to, represents a new era, in my view, in terms of the direction of the BNR development. I think it's not just about building infrastructures in many developing countries. It's also the next stage of the BNR, which is going beyond that, which gets into areas of people-to-people exchanges of societal aspects, and also interestingly, there's also one thing in the 8 items he mentioned. That's about opening China more. I think we can't talk about Belt and Road Initiative without talking about China being more open, more integrated to the international economy. For example, one thing he said that China is committed to entirely eliminate any hurdles to open entirely to foreign capital in manufacturing, for example. I mean, that's a huge commitment in my view, and very few countries can commit to something like this.
Professor Monyae, your thoughts?
This was indeed an excellent presentation, and it was delivered in an environment that is fast changing, and there were a number of ironies. As President Xi Jinping has brought in a huge delegation coming from all over the world in a harmonious way, building. The irony is that on the other parts of the world in the Middle East, we're stuck with destruction and where President Biden was going, more or less same day. The speech itself touched on key issues that are relevant. It means that after 10 years of Belt and Road Initiative, the continuity in a much more stable, refined, And it was a matter of fine-tuning some elements based on lessons learned in terms of both the positive and negative. I think this time around, going forward, China is prepared to continue with Belt and Road with the international community, a Belt and Road that is people-centered, that is environment-centered, that goes beyond major infrastructure building, involving culture, involving other issues that brings the world united and moving forward in a seamless way, all continents are dealing with issues of peace and security. And therefore, a number of issues that directly impact Africa in terms of Belt and Road. It will bring in the youth in terms of training into China. And he's also added new issues. For instance, for the very first time, artificial intelligence was mentioned as a key area going forward.
Right. So, Professor Gong, you've talked about the opening China more to an integrated international community, an international integrated economy, building a comprehensive Belt and Road connectivity network, promoting green development, advancing technological innovation. Which areas do you feel matter the most?
Well, I think all of these things matter. But if you want me to pick, I think in this political environment, the commitment to green development related to the climate agenda is probably more profound from a global perspective, from the human perspective, actually. If you want me to pick, I would say this is more concerning the entire global development, concerning the entire human development, concerning a lot of people in all countries.
Right, so I want to come back with the last 10 years and the projects that have been put in place, and particularly in Africa, Professor Munyai, because the issue of integrity and transparency on some BRI projects has been a criticism, as has been the need to make the project sustainable, risk-resistant, reasonably priced, inclusive and high quality. How have issues like debt sustainability, transparency, how have they been addressed?
I think there was a question of quality, dealing with issues of corruption, for instance, that we mentioned quite clearly. And also going forward, there is also this notion coming from the Western world, without mentioning names. President Xi Jinping spoke about quality BRI. And that means not just big rail and airport and harbors, which are critical. I think they will be continuing building them, but quality small projects, people-centered projects. I think we're going to see much more that issues that are sensitive to civilization are in line with some of his key concepts, such as global civilization initiative, global security, as well as global development. And you see the coordination of all this. But for me, a major takeaway was, for the very first time, President Xi Jinping mentioned that China is going to establish a secretariat for BRI. I thought that was a major announcement, and one is looking forward to see a much more quality secretariat that differs from other secretariat of other institutions that are biased and have Western bureaucracy. And one hopes that this secretariat will have people of the world work in a harmonious way and sensitive to regional issues. In this case, the Africa Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want, so that BRI projects are in line with the wishes and converge with the wishes of Africans.
So when you look at those BRI projects, Professor Munyai, and as we talk now, some 52 African countries already have BRI projects in them and MOUs with the BRI. Where do you see that Africa has seen the most benefit? Because you're talking about in the future aligning it with AU Agenda 2063. Where do you see the most benefit for the continent?
I think the continent needs connectivity. Connectivity in a broadly defined. I think we need to clear the bottlenecks to increase trade not just with China, but with the rest of the world, but most importantly, trade among ourselves as Africans to increase that, the flow of people, movement of goods, and ensure that we take these projects in line with what we can afford, and perhaps deal with the issues of the dollar, which is the elephant in the room. Some of the crises we have is that some of these loans are in US dollars. So if we're talking of using of local currencies, also to borrow in yuan, I think it's a stable current. I think going forward, there's a need to fine-tune some of these issues, responding to an unfair criticism against China, but bringing in fine solution where criticisms are.
Right. So, Professor Gong, of course, that whole element of financing that Professor Munyai has brought in there, and one of the significant developments announced at the BRI was on financing. Now, China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China will each set up a 350 billion yuan financing window and another additional 80 billion yuan loan to be injected into the Silk Fund Road. Explain this to us. What exactly does this mean? Are there new or specific areas targeted for financing here?
So far, $1 trillion, talking about $1 trillion has been spent so far. Capital has been spent on building mostly infrastructures in many developing countries over the last 10 years. And I think this announcement you have just mentioned testifies to the notion that BRI is not going to stop. It's going to keep going, and there's still going to be financing continuing into the future, even amidst the wave of criticisms from the West, the acquisition of debt trap, for example, all of these things. It's not going to dissuade China and its partners from further moving forward with these projects, not just hard infrastructure, maybe other projects as well. I think one of the notions that being talked a lot about at this summit, BRI summit, is what's called small and beautiful projects. Catering to small and medium-sized businesses, not just grandiose infrastructure projects. I think I want to make a few comments about the notion of debt trap. First of all, it doesn't resonate well with the real empirical observation. Yes, many countries have borrowed money from China, but if you look at the overall debt composition, the debt owed to China still represents not even the largest portion. We have seen, for example, a very significant portion of debt for countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan reportedly having financial problems, balance of payments problems. The biggest portion of debt is actually owed to these Western financial institutions, the bonds, commercial loans, at a much, much higher interest rate. So I think, the idea that a debt trap is totally nonsense, and I reject the whole theory.
So, Professor Munyai, I know you have to leave, but I just have two very quick questions for you before I let you go. Leaders and representatives from over 140 countries and 30 international organizations attended this forum. In light of the slow economic growth globally and the evolving global dynamics, how is the Belt and Road Initiative likely to impact the global agenda, the global development agenda?
I think it's going to really bring the world together in terms of connectivity. Lessons learned in China since the opening in 1978, and the achievements that China is on a yearly basis making, science and technology, on climate, Beijing, these days one will see blue sky. China has been able to really clear the smoke and deal with the crisis of pollution. And these are lessons to the world that as we develop green energy, and therefore going forward, I think there will be more and more of these projects that are going to have a positive impact. But while dealing with infrastructure, understanding infrastructure also leads to other issues such as peace and security. People will communicate more, will trade among themselves in a way, and deal with crisis. On our continent, one will expect Egypt and Ethiopia, for instance, to resolve the issue over the dam in a way that these are major infrastructure, and try to resolve those conflicts. And one would add competition with the Western world. There is a need to welcome the Western world projects so that it becomes an advantage for the African continent. We do see China-led infrastructure. We're also waiting to see Western-led infrastructure so that there's competition, and that reduces the cost of doing business, the cost of building this infrastructure, so that we can compare apple with apple. At the moment, we don't have that. There's just criticism, and the Western world is not good at developing big infrastructure.
So what do you see as the important takeaway from the BRI over the last decade?
A number of takeaway. I think there is enthusiasm across all continents. And I think for Africa, similarly, I think we see a number of projects. We have the bridge in Mozambique, an outstanding bridge built by China. We have the Mombasa, Nairobi, Ethiopia, Egypt. These are major projects. In Bandung, Indonesia, I think they just opened a train, the second train with the highest speed at 350 kilometers. So I think these major projects are significant, speaks to the wishes of the developing world for knowledge transfer, technology transfer, people-to-people exchange, and that brings a harmonious and a peaceful world that we want.
So, Professor Gong, your final thoughts, particularly on the long-term implications and the prospects for BRI in the context of shaping the future of global economic and infrastructural development, particularly as a driver of global economic growth?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the BRI is going to continue. It's going to continue to expand this essentially commercial network, global commercial network that connect many countries, providing jobs and business and economic opportunities and a lot of people around the world. I think one thing that that I'm starting to observe is that once these infrastructures are in place, trade will naturally follow. Investment will naturally follow. And one of the things that the BRI projects are building is industrial parks, for example, close to the ports, close to the transportation hubs. And in these industrial parks, there will be investments coming from not just Chinese companies, but from other companies around the world as well. And these investments tend to increase trade, increase jobs in a local economy. And I think this is definitely something going to happen. So in other words, I think we're really talking about a peaceful development of a global network, albeit, of course, a lot of it is actually steered and led by Chinese companies. But nevertheless, it's a global commercial network that's for the benefits of not just China, but also BRI partner countries as well. And the scale of this network, the scale of the commercial network is going to be a very significant event in recent human history. We've never seen something like this before. A commercial network that is developed peacefully over a very short period of time, benefiting so many people. And I think in terms of the economic positioning of the global South versus the developed North, it's going to be reflected because of the BRI development. And I think it will inevitably spill over into the political domain, where the global South wants to have a more louder say and more influential role to play in international and global governance.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for your insights. Well, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll look at the impact of Belt and Road projects in Africa. To stay with us. The Belt and Road Initiative has over the last decade injected billions of dollars into projects across Africa. In the Gambia, new roads and bridges have opened up trade and accessibility to remote areas of the country. Let's now cross over to my colleague Mamadou Choi at QTV in the Gambia to take a closer look at some of the impact the BRI has already had. Welcome to the program, Mamadou.
Thank you, Beatrice. Joining me is Dr. Ismaila Cisse, political science lecturer at the University of the Gambia and part-time professor at the College of Foreign Languages, Zhejiang Normal University of China. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on this program today. Let's begin here in the Gambia. What have been some of the BRI projects that have been implemented and the impacts it have had on the lives of the people?
Well, they're huge. For example, as part of the China Aid Road and Bridges project, it consists of a grant of in excess of $81 million to build infrastructural projects in the Gambia. This includes a 51-kilometer road from Basse to Fatoto and 2 grand bridges, 2 minor bridges. The bridges are 250 meters long, for example, one in Basse and 170 in Fatoto. But also, they've built a big $50 million OIC conference center here in the Gambia. So this is huge. The impacts are also huge and they cannot be quantified. For example, it has created more linkages among people, especially in the URR. It has boosted internal trade. It has eased internal travel. It has improved livelihoods in the Gambia. So indeed, the BRI in the Gambia through the China Aid project is really huge.
Yes. Looking at the wider West Africa region, where have the BRI projects made significant impact on the people?
In many places and in many ways. For example, before it was in East Africa. Following on from East Africa, where the Chinese, through the BRI framework, built roads, bridges, refineries, dams, you name it, they came to Africa. Recently, a deal was signed between some West African countries and China within the framework of the BRI to build or to construct an intra-African highway running from Dakar to Djibouti, but also the rehabilitation of the Bamako-Dakar railway link, but also $8 billion was injected to build a railway link connecting landlocked Bamako to the port of Conakry. But also 2 dams are being built in Ivory Coast and in Conakry. In addition to that, $7.5 billion was given to Ivory Coast to boost infrastructural development. And this is really huge for the West African continent.
We've also seen across the continent, of course, African leaders were attending the BRI Forum in Beijing. What have been the most significant outcomes for the continent from that forum?
I'll start with a quote from Xi Jinping, who said that China will now give access to foreign companies to access Chinese markets. But also, China is ready to inject in excess of $100 billion into emerging and developing economies. And this is huge. Now, one thing that runs across the entire theme is the issue about shared prosperity, the issue about a shared future, the issue about promoting inclusive development, which has consequences for security. See, when people move together and then our challenges are being worked together and then our development is also inclusive, it makes sure that security problems are lessened in the African continent. And China speaks along those terms about shared prosperity, a shared future, where no matter where you are in the world, no matter the size of your country, we move together as a global nation, and this is very, very interesting. And one thing that also comes across from the forum is the issue of more focus on investment than loans to reduce the debt burden from African countries, but also moving away towards what they call green development. Now the focus is on environmental development to ensure that environmental degradation within the framework of the BRI is lessened. And I think this is huge, this is important, because most African countries complain of the debt burden, but now China wants to make sure that the focus is on investment than loans and debts, and also the focus is on green development. So this is also another milestone within the framework of the BRI.
President Xi Jinping at the forum talked about making the BRI multi-dimensional, meaning establishing more corridors across the continent. What are your thoughts on Xi Jinping's speech on that?
This aligns with Africa's vision to create what they call an integrated Africa, where African countries integrate their markets for greater prosperity for all African countries, but also for every country in the globe. And I think China is here to support, China is here to help, and I think Xi's speech is apt to the extent that now this can be integrated within what they call the African continental free trade as well. So what this does is to boost more intra-African trade, which will boost prosperity in the African continent, but also support what they call global peace and also sustainable development in the African continent. So I think there also Xi and China are on point as well.
When it comes to the implementation of the BRI projects in the Gambia, you know, the tendering process, how do we ensure transparency in the tendering and implementation process of the BRI projects on the continent?
Remember, the BRI is a huge project with over 3,000 projects, over 152 countries, 30 organizations, over $1 trillion worth of investment. It is huge. Therefore, I think what African countries can do is two things. One is to learn from China. China has a democratic system which promotes transparency, and I believe that if Africa looks into how China does it, we'll do it right. But also, African countries need to enhance and strengthen their internal domestic institutions that make sure that the tendering process is transparent, but also promotes accountability and also reduce instances of financial mismanagement. I think we can only do that if we learn from China, if you look into how China does it, if you look at the way China promotes transparency and accountability and democracy, I think then in that way we're able to make sure that we minimize or mitigate the impacts of promoting transparency also in the tendering process.
So what more opportunities do you think lies for the African continent in the BRI projects?
It's unending. You can quantify it. The potentials are huge. The opportunities are enormous. I think Africa just has to work together with China. China provides an alternative. I mean, the relationship between China and Africa is not today. It is based on friendship. It is based on a common bond. It is based on a historical past, but also a shared future. So I think if we work together, the potentials are enormous. And I've just heard Xi speak at the forum, and then that really promoted the idea that China is ready not only to support, but they want us to go together. And I like this whole idea of shared future, shared prosperity. I think if Africa really works together with China and then put up a collective strategy, Africa can gain a lot from the BRI project.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your insights.
Thank you.
We will now take you back to Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Thank you for joining us. And from all of us here at QTV in the Gambia, it's a goodbye.
Thank you very much indeed, Mamadou. Well, very insightful discussion there, but that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to all our guests, Professor John Gong, University of International Business and Economics in Israel, and a China Forum expert, Professor David Monyai, International Relations and Foreign Policy expert and Director at the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies, and Dr. Ismailia Sise, Political Science Lecturer at the University of the Gambia and part-time professor at the College of Foreign Languages, Xiqian Normal University of China. Thank you too to Mamadou Choi and our colleagues at QTV in the Gambia. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's bye-bye.